Hi folks, I'm going to do a couple of videos today, slightly joined. The first one's going to be my history of training, sort of how I got into Strongman, where I'm at now, and a little offshoot video which I'll film separately is sort of earlier injury I had and how I suggest people avoid that kind of thing. Um, So, World's Strongest Man has always been a family tradition of ours, I suppose. Around Christmas time, I always joke now when I find out about the results, because it's filmed 6 months earlier, that, wherever I find it out of spoils Christmas, basically. And for me, it, it is part of that Christmas experience. It's sort of one of the things I really look forward to anyway. I know it's at Christmas time, and it could be in the summer sometime, and it could move, but it's kind of synonymous with the Christmas period, really, for me. So I've always watched it. One of the first ones I remember was Jeff Capes and John Paul Sigmarsson. I think it was in Iceland, certainly somewhere snowy, and I'm guessing that was either 83 or 84, which would have put me just about turning 8, I suppose, around that time. And I've watched it religiously ever since. Back then, of course, that was it for Strongman. You wouldn't see any other footage anywhere. Um, and indeed, it was unheard of. You wouldn't have known about any competitions going on across the country. There wasn't much, of course, but you didn't hear anything about it. Never had any media coverage. Um, so personally, I mean, I've always been sporty, was always able to turn my hand to most things. When I was younger, going to football, that was kind of my school thing, I suppose. We didn't play rugby, unfortunately, in my school. I was I wasn't particularly skilled at football, but I was pretty fit and keen, 5, 6-a-side football was my forte, where it was often more about sort of fitness than actual skill. But I did all right in the 11-a-side game. I was a fullback, um, but I was more physical than actually skillful. You know, I had some nicknames, but I won't go into them right now. Then I found swimming. Um, I suppose competitively that started for me about 11 or 12. I had swum before that, and we had our own club a bit before, but it's kind of kicked off quite seriously about that 11 or 12-year-old age, and I was swimming twice a day, every day training. I've mentioned this before, hour and a half in the morning, hour and a half after school. Kept me out of trouble anyway. Didn't have much energy for anything else, always swimming. Weekends we were away competing, and I got up to representing my county level. Um, but age 17, I kind of discovered beer and other distractions, and I kind of made the decision not to go full time. Our club wasn't brilliant, and the option really was moving to another club where things were a bit more scientific based. And I was getting disillusioned in our club anyway. I suppose our coaching setup wasn't ideal, and for example, I was a sprinter, and they put things like 10 400 meters on the board. Well, at 17, I was driving. I'd sprint the first one and get out, basically, because really didn't see what it was doing for me. And at that time, other clubs were becoming a bit more science based, and they would have lanes separately for sprinters, as it is now. And well, it was the introduction of weights about that time. A good friend of mine moved to a different club, and to be honest, as Mark Foster has said, sort of Britain's most famous swimmer, and at the time he was the only professional in the country, which says something about sport in this country, really. But as he used to say, he'd spend much more time in the gym than actually swimming. His swimming session would include a bit of a warm up, a couple of 50-meter sprints and cool down again. That would be a session sometimes, you know. None of this, what I was doing at the time, 5,000, 7,000 meters per session, really didn't have any benefit to me as a sprinter at all. But we were just trained across the board, you know, one size fits all in my club. So I was becoming disillusioned, as I say, found other distractions and moved away from swimming a bit. But I just caught the sort of start of that introduction to weights. We were doing a lot more land work, or it was coming in anyway, where we were doing a bit more land work. My friend took that to the next level, ended up competing in the Commonwealth Games and things, but I went down another path. So I started lifting weights at that time, and following A levels, I took a year out, started working in a leisure centre, and whilst it was lifeguarding initially, I did then move on into the gym. I was involved in setting us up a new gym, and I was doing at one point the majority of the gym inductions, which is just a kind of health and safety procedure more than anything else to cover the leisure centre, fill in a few forms and ultimately show people how to use the equipment. So I'd done a few courses, a few MVQs, and it was sort of touched upon some personal training. If somebody wanted it, we'd write them a bit of a session. And coming from my swimming background, I had a bit of an idea in terms of sports specific weightlifting and what that could do for you to benefit whatever sport you wanted to. So just bear with me. So that was the start of things. I had free use of the borough equipment as it was. We had a number of gyms. It was mostly machine stuff, very little free weights. We had some dumbbells, but that was the start of my training. And then I got my own gym set up. I was still living at home at the time. Just a little York bench. I had some fly attachments, and I had the old York workout planner, which I'm sure many people have seen. It was quite famous sort of during the 80s. I had that, follow through the different exercises. I used to do whole body workouts at that time. And the problem, which I'm going to touch upon in another video shortly, was I developed my first kind of problem with the home gym. Bench could go quite heavy, obviously, but I didn't have the sort of same volume for the back. And an old swimmer's injury, you get a lengthening of the rotator cuff muscle, so everything was quite loose in the shoulder. Indeed, well, I'm supposed to be going into this in another video, but I'll touch upon it now. And I ultimately developed a bit of an imbalance, which I'll talk about in the following video. So, and I talk about balancing the body out and things like that. All the things that I was explaining to clients in our gym, you know, the problem hit me. So after a period of rehabilitation, I realised the importance of that, and I'll entitle my next video pull as much as you can push. And that basic concept, which is a hashtag now, really hit home for me. I needed to balance out what I was doing on the bench, and things were moving along quite nicely. I remember pressing 80 or 90, and obviously I was training on my own. I remember my first roll of shame, you know, going to failure and just not having any way of getting the weights off you. Obviously a bit dangerous, not something I'd promote, but you know, we've all been there. So yeah, so it was about then training a bit more properly in the gym, building my back up, you know, not just focusing on the chest. And this is obviously something I advocate now. But there was no real goal, you know, there was no competition anymore. I tried out for rugby, did a bit, I did a bit of boxing. I was looking for competition, really. I've always thrived on that. Training for the sake of training. I don't know how people do it, to be honest. It takes real internal motivation to keep going. I find it much easier having something on the horizon there that you have to train towards. And for me, you know, competitions, it has always been what it's all about. So after that, I found water polo. We actually set up our water polo team, coming from Newport back in the 80s. Newport were British champions for 3 years running, early 80s, before my time. And ultimately, the pool got reconfigured. It wasn't deep enough anymore, and the water polo team got wound down. So 20 years later, I suppose, we got it going again. We had a small team. We struggled, to be honest. We struggled to make the 7, whereas it's a bit like basketball. You can rotate subs as much as you like. Well, we didn't have any subs, so us mostly old boys that we'd recruited. We had a couple of rugby players. We found that sort of suited that team ethic. It was easier to get rugby players and teach them how to swim than take swimmers, which is very much an individual sport, and get them to play a team game. You know, they weren't that keen. So we were physically strong guys. I was all right at sprinting, but some of the others not so much. And our only games really were against the university sides, young fit boys, and to be honest, they'd swim rings round us and give us a whooping most of the time. But you know, I loved that competition. That renewed something in me again. So we spin on a few years then. That team wound down, unfortunately. We couldn't get enough support, enough players involved. So probably coincided then with me moving out, getting my own gym in the garage, and new house now, bigger garage, more equipment. It was just niggling at me, and Strongman's sort of taking off now. There's more of it on the telly and all, and I was approaching 40, and I just figured I'd do it, you know, before I get too old. I'd sort of look into getting into it. Kids came along, and it kind of made things a little bit difficult. In terms of, obviously, what I would recommend if you wanted to get into strongman is find a local gym that has all the equipment. I didn't have time to train elsewhere. Having my own gym, it's a case of, you know, fall out of bed, just jump in there. Or I was, at one point when I was working 9-5, I was getting up at 5 in the morning just to train before the kids woke up. So, you know, I wasn't feeling like I wasn't pulling my own weight in terms of, you know, raising, you know, the young kids at the time. And then ultimately my training slot was in the morning. I had to have my daughter in with me. Got a telly set up in there. She ended up doing a bit, so it wasn't too bad, you know. And there just wouldn't have been time to travel to. Well, I didn't have time if I wasn't in work, because I moved my shifts to working long days, and then I was off before I had the kids to sort out. You know, there wasn't any window. Now I get a 2-hour window when she's in nursery. She started in September. It's still difficult to go to a gym, train, change, shower, get back in that time. The window's too small. So having my own gym allowed me that opportunity. I could get sessions in when I like. And now, as I say, I train when she's in nursery on my 3 days a week. I'm not in work. And that's great. So the goal, the sort of dream, I guess, of doing a strongman comp before I was too old was hanging on. I started buying some equipment. I think I got the log first, which I loved. I've always loved overhead pressing anyway. I think from the swimming background, decent shoulders, and you know, that was just a great fit. But it was one of those iconic strongman events, you know, for me, the log overhead, the sort of strongman deadlift, and the stones, you know, they're the things people think of. And you know, it was great to have a bit of kit and to do that, and it gave me a new kind of renewed enthusiasm for training. And then I got a stone. I think I had it for my birthday or something, my first stone. And it's just gone on from that. I had a bit of a setback then. Both my knees needed cartilage trimming the meniscus, and unfortunately, they found arthritis in there as well. So a bit of a setback. I was I was knocked back after that, and it took me best part of a year to get back to as strong as I was. And of course, I was just starting off on the strongman. So then suddenly I was kind of 40 had come, and I thought my goal was to do it before 40. So really had to step it up and make a decision. And ultimately, I just went for it. I entered a competition last year, was my first competition. Entered it with a few months to go. Had to buy a bit more kit. I bought a yoke, but we had 6 weeks to go, and going from never using a yoke, never having that core, which I think is the key to me. I struggled really, so I highlighted a few weaknesses. But thoroughly enjoyed the competition, and it's really spurred me on now. I've got more kit, as you enter a comp, you find you haven't got something, an axle, I had to buy an axle. But all with those goals and the training, I'm just doubly motivated, is the only way to say it. I don't skip sessions. I've always been quite internally motivated anyway. When I was getting up at 5 in the morning, it was killing me. I wasn't getting my 8 hours sleep in, which I need. But I did it, and that it was either that or you're not training. So I did it, and now I've a little bit more time. I got that slot in the morning. There's not that pressure. I can always train, but having that goal, as I say, just spurs me on, and I train a lot harder. Something I think the main benefit, which I recommend Strongman to anybody, whatever the reason, just for health. Keep trying to get my wife to get involved a bit more, or to benefit other sports, or just to benefit your own gym stuff. The biggest benefit is the core work. When I used to train, I used to do like on the ab roller and the dolphin sort of back raises. I thought that was doing core. It's not. Excuse me, just had to cough. I never had a core until I started doing yoke and farmers walks and things like that. I really didn't know what core was. Walking with a weight on your back, you shake, and when you breathe, you just collapse. There was no core. And then as soon as I started doing that, all my other lifts just skyrocketed. My deadlift came on by, well, I had done 200 kilos before getting injured with my knees, basically, but it was real wobbly, poor technique, and had a couple of niggles with my back whenever I get that heavy. Now I feel pretty strong, lifting well over 200 kilos. Or well over. My max is 220 at the moment, but I'm certainly planning on continuing that growth, and my target is 240 for this year. So within 6 months, I've gone from 200 to 220. It's quite vast, when normally I'd be looking at kind of 5 kilo, improvement. And, my other lifts, my log, which I'd obviously started doing a bit before the rest of the stuff, before I developed a core, that's come on from something, it wasn't not so long ago, it was about 90, and now I'm 105. Percentage wise, quite a massive increase. And I really put that down to the core work, the yoke, the farmer's walk, the carries. And as I say, I can't recommend it higher to anybody, whatever your goals are, whatever your training is, whatever your sport, or just people like my wife, that isn't sort of sports orientated but just wants to keep a bit fit. Strongman stuff ticks all those boxes, and it helps with your posture, with your strength, everyday stuff, carrying the shopping in, is a farmer's walk ultimately, isn't it? So, that becomes so much easier, day-to-day stuff. So yeah, please I hope you enjoyed this video. I've prattled on a bit. It's knocking 20 minutes now, but I will be back with a second one later on today to talk about my injury and balancing the body out. But if you've liked my video today, please give it a thumbs up, and I hope you subscribe. Look out for other videos, other strongman content, and you can follow me on my journey as I'm hoping to, well, I am competing at the end of this month, and I'm going to do a bit more of a blog, I think it's called, or a vlog, bit more footage behind the scenes and what it's like doing a competition. Obviously you've seen the big guys on the telly, but lower level stuff, I'm still in the beginners category, and it's achievable for anyone really, so just a bit of insight. People might not know what it's like, or might be a bit scared to do so I'm going to have videos like that coming along, and hopefully it might give someone that little push that they needed to get into this sport, which I'm a massive fan of, and I'm enjoying seeing it grow. So thanks, drop us a like if you've liked this video, if you've got anything from it. Please follow me, and as I say, look out for other future content on strongman stuff. Thanks a lot, folks.